Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every episode, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me. And most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. Please help us to spread the word by taking a minute to rate and review the show in iTunes and by telling your friends and colleagues. I had the chance to sit down with Elaine Nektritz at the E2 and NRDC offices in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. Elaine has been one of the architects of Illinois' current heading to be a 100% clean energy state by 2050. She served in the Illinois legislature for nearly 15 years, chairing several committees and ultimately co-authoring what became FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act of 2016. It's a law that approaches renewable energy expansion from a green jobs perspective, building clean energy job training centers in disadvantaged communities throughout the state. Representative Nektritz is also expert in transportation issues, having chaired the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. It spans her childhood in Wichita, Kansas, to careers in policy and clean energy, to the future of high-speed rail. Well, Elaine Nektritz, welcome and thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So I want to start just by talking about your background. We sit here in Chicago today, and you're from a different part of the Midwest, Wichita, Kansas. Tell me a little bit about where you come from and what your childhood was like, what your parents did.
My father was an engineer with Boeing his entire career at a time when folks stayed with one company throughout their entire career. My mother was a stay-at-home homemaker, but she was, to my mind, well ahead of her time when it came to environmental issues and imbued her children with those values as well.
So how so? What sort of environmentalist was she?
She cared a lot about the products that were used in her home. So she sought out and bought products that didn't have perfumes or at the time in the 1960s and 70s were hard to find, but that were allegedly environmentally friendly and much less toxic.
A woman way ahead of her time.
Way ahead of her time. She also, and I remember being so embarrassed by this, but she took her own cloth bags to the grocery store at a time when no one did that. And she was insistent about doing that. And if we forgot them as her kids, we heard about it, but she hated plastic, actually.
Well, for good cause, as we now know.
Yes, exactly.
Although not in an age when plastics was everything. I'm thinking back to The Graduate and
right.
Advice to Dustin Hoffman to go into plastics.
Yes, and we didn't have plastic water bottles. They weren't quite so ubiquitous as they are now. But I'm sure she would have been vehemently opposed to those as well.
How did we have water back then?
I know.
What happened when we were thirsty?
Right.
It's kind of incredible. So were you in nature? Was your childhood one where you were outside in nature or not so much?
We were. I think my parents loved to go out and take a day trip out into the Kansas countryside and have a picnic out there and then come home in the evening. And our family vacations were very much the same kind of thing. We traveled together in one car, and then we would stop somewhere by the side of the road and have a picnic and get back in and keep driving until we got to Colorado, where there were some mountains and some gorgeous scenery.
That sounds beautiful. And you went to college in San Antonio, Texas, right?
I did. Yeah.
And what did you study?
I studied economics, mostly because there was a professor there that I really, really liked. And it was a small liberal arts school, Trinity University. And there weren't a whole lot of other things, I think, that I found of interest at that point. And this one professor really piqued my interest.
Were there learnings or principles that you took later into your career?
Probably some economic theories, but I don't think about it a lot,
Yeah.
actually, and it feels like a million years ago. I feel more connected to my law studies and
And
the
to University
things
of
that
Michigan, right?
University of Michigan, yes, yeah, and how that has informed and helped me in my career.
How so?
Certainly, as a as a legislator, having the ability to read statutes and read bills with more of a legal lens, and I just found that to be a really, really helpful part of my background of just to have understand how do those statutes relate to the Constitution, and how does that inform the policy work that I was doing.
Did you have a particular focus at law school, or was it?
I did not, and law school, I think, for the most part, taught me a vocabulary and a way of thinking. It certainly never taught me to practice law. I will say that.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I say the same thing about business school.
Yes. Yeah.
But did you have any exposure to environmental law or energy law, for that matter, at school?
I think I had some environmental law class. It might have even been a seminar, but it wasn't significant, and certainly nothing with regard to energy, which would have been really helpful as it turns out. But I didn't have any of that.
And you went on then to practice real estate law, is that right?
I did. I spent 9 years at a Chicago downtown law firm. Started out in litigation, which was a terrible fit for me. The vagaries of standing before a judge and not being able to predict what was going to happen was terribly upsetting to me. So I didn't last very long doing that, and then moved into real estate, which was a much better fit, just in terms of the negotiating and everyone wanting to come to a common result as opposed to fighting to beat somebody.
Mm-hmm. Much more of a negotiated sort of business oriented.
Yes, much more collaborative.
And I'm curious to get a sense of how Illinois law treats real estate in terms of environments. Is it are the laws? I know in California their permitting is pretty strict, and we have CEQA, which is a pretty rigorous process to go through before certainly any large-scale commercial real estate development. Can you describe a little bit about the process, or what the process is for protecting the environment when looking at real estate development?
I have to say, when I was practicing and then looking at those laws as a policymaker in the Illinois House, certainly I don't think Illinois is anywhere near as far along in protecting and preserving the environment as California is. I don't think we're the worst in the nation, but we're certainly not as far along as California. That's not to say you don't get a lot of complaining about the permitting process, but a lot of that looked to me more like it was that Illinois, the complaints that we got were more related more to the federal permitting processes, and that Illinois didn't go too far beyond Illinois didn't go too far beyond the federal
implementing the federal standards.
Correct.
And actually, I noticed in reading about you that you are a bicycle racer,
Mm-hmm.
You were quite competitive, right?
Yes.
You made it to the '88 Olympic trials.
Mm-hmm.
And you went on to work for a little while in the bicycle industry in Alberto's, which is, I bought a bike there, so I'm familiar. It's a good store.
Uh-huh.
Just tell me a little bit about your interest in, and you still to this day, I believe, serve on a couple cycling related boards. Is that right? Or is that, or have you phased out of those?
I don't anymore. So I never loved practicing law, as you could probably tell in my responses to your questions. So when I married one of my partners, I decided that I no longer needed to practice law. And I played for a lot of years. I raced, which I loved bike racing. And as you indicated, I worked at a bike shop, and just, selling, doing some administrative type duties and so forth. But I loved the atmosphere, and I really, really loved the people that I worked with at the bike shop.
And were you a road racer?
I did road racing, and I did some, mostly in the Midwest, it's a lot of criterium racing, which is the shorter course with a more cornering, because they're generally done in urban environments where they have to just work your way around some city streets.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cornering involved.
Pretty technical.
It's pretty much more technical, yes. And then I had the good fortune in the community that I live in Northbrook, there's actually a velodrome there. So I did.
Is it wood floored?
No. It's outdoor. So it's concrete. And it's not an Olympic style velodrome. I don't know what they were thinking when they built it, but it's lower and flatter than a traditional Olympic velodrome. But I also went to Indy to race in the velodrome at Indianapolis, and there's another one up in Kenosha. So we had quite an opportunity for track racing here.
Very cool. Well, wait, this is a total tangent, but I'll finish with this question. What's sort of the state of bike lanes and bike accessibility in Chicago these days?
There's actually pretty good bike access and bikes. I think I would say cycling safety accommodations in Chicago. I believe that the mayor Emanuel committed to 100 miles of protected bike lanes. And he's done that. And I think that there's now a commitment to another 100 miles of protected bike lanes. So the city has been pretty good at working with the cycling advocacy community to develop facilities, especially in a city where it's 4 or 5 months a year. You really got to want to ride your bike to work here if you want to go riding. So,
right.
So given that that's a cold weather community, that there's pretty severe winters here.
Especially this winter.
Yes, especially this winter, yes. The cycling facilities are pretty amazing.
So you served in, I guess, fast forwarding just a little bit, you served in the Illinois House for 15 years, and you were representing Chicago's north and northwest suburbs. Correct. Is that sort of the northwest corner of Cook County? Is that?
Yes. So my district was almost entirely in Cook County. But right along the northern tier between Cook and Lake counties.
So what was the impetus to run? And I know that you served as alleged aide for Jeff Schoenberg for a number of years. So maybe that was your entry to politics. But what prompted you to actually run for office?
So like a lot of folks, and especially women, I was not sitting around thinking that I wanted to get into politics or into the legislature. And a friend of mine asked me if I would be interested in running. And my first response was, that's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. I don't know anything about politics. I'm not interested. I hate public speaking. I had a whole litany of excuses as to why this was a really bad idea. But she was relentless in pushing me to do this. And at the time, I was a Democrat running in what was a pretty strong Republican area. So there weren't any other Democrats stepping forward. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to race bikes and work in a bike shop the rest of my life. So, okay, I'll give it a shot. That was in 1996. I lost, but I really enjoyed the experience a lot. And the people that I met and the exposure to issues was exciting to me in a way that a lot of other things in my working career had not been. So that's when I went to work for Jeff Schoenberg as a state rep. He was a state rep at that point. And then in 2002, after the remap in 2002, there was a district that opened up, and my husband said, "Yep, if you want to go for it again." So I did, and that was a successful run.
And what did you learn from the process of campaigning? What was your platform, or what were the top issues on your platform, and what did you take from that sort of into actually legislating?
I find this to be a really fascinating question because every legislator handles that question a little bit differently. I heard very little at the doors that I knocked on about what people were interested in. Everybody complained that their property taxes were too high. But beyond that, you got a smattering of issues, but nothing that would say, Elaine, this is the direction you ought to go. When it came to statewide issues, there were some local issues that I heard about that I got to work on. But in terms of larger questions. So frankly, I just followed my passion, which was a lot of environmental stuff. And so for the first few, and cycling as well. So for the first few years, I worked on a number of environmental initiatives as well as some cycling initiatives.
What sorts of issues were you working on?
Toxics and consumer products. I tried
going back to your mother.
What?
Going back to your mother.
Going back to my mother. Exactly right. At the time, I was working on banning the flame retardants that are in a lot of draperies, carpets, fabrics, furniture.
Quite toxic.
Quite
Quite toxic.
Yes, they are polybrominated diphenyl ethers, and they are. Since then, there's been some work at the federal level to phase them out. But I did that, and the bisphenol A, the BPA that's in hard plastics. I tried desperately to ban those products in Illinois and never got it passed. But I do feel like there was all the work that was going on at the state level pushed the feds to take some action, and frankly pushed the companies making those chemicals to phase them out or change them.
So that phase out, just help me understand this a little bit, because my understanding is that phase out was really a consumer driven thing. But this was actually were these EPA regs that led to the phase out, or
federally? Oh, you're stretching my memory there. I think it was more that just the companies said, look, people don't want these products in their home, so we're going to phase it out. I don't think the EPA ever actually took action on it, the federal EPA.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But it was fun to be part of that consumer education, consumer movement. And then when the companies have to play defense in lots of states across the country, they also get tired of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you kind of chip away at their willingness to keep on with a given product line. So you went on to chair the House Judiciary Civil Law Committee, as well as the House Personnel and Pension Committees. What was your path to those committees? What was your interest, for example, in personnel and pension that led you there?
Illinois has a very significant pension problem, both at the state level and at the federal level. We have an unfunded our state pension systems are underfunded to the tune of $130 billion, maybe a little bit more. And we have the worst pension problem in the country at a time when lots of states and lots of municipalities have bad pension problems. Ours is the worst. And to my mind, if we were ever going to fix the state budget and be able to spend state dollars on education, the environment, public safety, all the things that we look to state government to do, we had to address this pension problem. So that's what led me to engage in that. I didn't know a thing about pensions when I started, other than that we had this huge debt that we had hanging over our heads and that others told me was a big problem. And now, as I dug into it and understood the impact that debt has on our ability to pay for other current state services, I understood it a lot better.
So how did you address it?
We ultimately, after, probably 4 or 5 years of really concentrated work, got the legislature to pass some legislation that had some impact on the benefit levels, mostly right now, just some benefit levels. And what we didn't do was affect the size of anybody's retirement check, either the day they were going to retire or if they were already retired. We didn't reduce the size of that check. What we did reduce was the increases going forward. Unfortunately, the Illinois Supreme Court didn't see it as positively as the legislature did and ruled that it was unconstitutional. So we're back to where we were prior to all that work.
So the mess continues.
The mess continues.
Pension mess continues in Illinois.
Yep.
And contributes a lot, I think, is my understanding, to the overall sort of ongoing budgetary crisis in the state.
I think in a very significant way. We spend, round numbers, 25 cents of every tax dollar toward our pension payment. Most states are in the 5 to 10 cent range.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you freed up another 15 cents of every tax dollar to go to education or to go to some other current state services, I think we would be we wouldn't be behind the 8 ball so much as we are on all those other areas. But we have decided to pay. We've decided to ask future generations to pay for the sins of the past.
Yeah. Asking future generations to pay for our sins is a good segue to talk about climate. And
indeed it is, yes.
And I'm curious as to sort of when in your legislative career your interest in climate and environment started to manifest. What issues were you working on?
So I introduced a greenhouse gas emissions cap in, I would say, the mid-2000s. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I worked.
How was that received?
Not well, especially from the organized labor community in Illinois, which is, has a lot of organized labor working at coal-fired power plants and nuclear power plants. And so it became clear very quickly that bill was not going to move anywhere. But I still felt it was an important conversation starter for Illinois. And then, sort of the whole conversation at the federal level became just kind of went away for a while, and we didn't really talk about climate change. Or we talked about it. We used other words.
That's right.
But we didn't use the words climate change. And
could use efficiency and cost savings.
Exactly. Clean energy. But so I don't think we revisited any of that kind of activity specifically for 10 or 12 years in Illinois, in the Illinois legislature.
So what did you go on to, what other issues then did you work on besides the cap on carbon?
That was probably during the pension debate, which was a all-consuming kind of issue for me.
And during that time, my understanding is, and I might be getting the sequence slightly off, but you worked on the Rail Commission.
I did.
I believe you chaired the Rail Commission.
The Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, yes.
So was the commission considering and looking at high-speed rail at the time?
Depends on your definition of high-speed rail, but I would say the answer was yes. Illinois has been the beneficiary of a lot of federal dollars to improve our rail service. So we have enhanced mostly along the Chicago to St. Louis line, but enhanced that so that it can, once the safety equipment is installed, it can go 110 miles an hour. Which I think is a pretty big improvement from 79 miles an hour, and will make it very competitive in a downtown to downtown trip with driving.
Yeah. And are people flying from Chicago to St. Louis?
They do. Yeah. They do. And I would think, if you can do that in 4.5 hours on a train that's comfortable, you can get up and walk around, you can have a drink, you can have Wi-Fi, and you can get there in less time than you would to get to the airport and go through all the hassle of security, I think that would be very competitive.
How important were greenhouse gas emissions in looking at the design of rail in Illinois and across the Midwest?
I have to say not very. It was certainly for some of us looking at that question working on the rail issue. We cared about emissions, and we would like to get people out of their cars and make the train a viable option for them. But that wasn't the driving force behind it. Really, the driving force behind it was just improving passenger rail service in the state of Illinois. And Illinois has had a long-standing commitment to passenger rail, and this was a way to enhance that.
So in that speed improvement from Chicago to St. Louis, is that done on existing equipment?
It is done on the existing right-of-way, yes, right-of-way. This is on the existing rails, which are owned mostly by the Union Pacific. As you get closer from St. Louis, as you get closer to Chicago from the south, there's some Canadian National and some others involved as well, but mostly it's Union Pacific line. And
is it viable to do the same sort of thing between Chicago and, I don't know, Madison or Indianapolis or Minneapolis?
It would be certainly to Indianapolis because there are existing lines that go to Indianapolis. There's also, so the state of Illinois supports 4 passenger rail lines through tax dollars. One is the Chicago to Milwaukee line that I think is the highest ridership in the country of any Amtrak line. Yes, the Chicago to St. Louis, Chicago to Carbondale, and then Chicago to Quincy, and all of those have university towns along the way. So the U of I, on the Chicago to Carbondale, there's the U of I in addition to Southern Illinois University. Quincy is the Western Illinois University. So there's a lot of support among the students, their families, and for rail. And that has been a big piece of the history as to why the state of Illinois actually supported those lines.
Yeah, we're having a hell of a time trying to get high-speed rail through in California.
Yes, you are.
And well, depending on how you look at the situation, fortunately or unfortunately, the new Governor Newsom is it's not as high a priority for him as it was for Jerry Brown.
Yeah. Yeah, the true high speed, the European, Japanese style high speed rail is just so expensive that it's just difficult at a time when we're not investing in infrastructure in this country. It's difficult to get the dollars together to do that.
So a bit later, and I don't want to breeze over any other sort of energy or environment related work that you did before we get to what became the Future Energy Jobs Act.
Sure.
We'll get to that in a minute. But anything else that we should talk about while you were in the legislature that was focused on climate or energy or transportation?
No, well, the only other thing that I can think of is that there were several efforts to improve cycling infrastructures and safety for pedestrians and cyclists. So I worked on the enactment of the Complete Streets program through the legislature.
Tell me a little bit about what the Complete Streets is. I've heard of this. This isn't exclusive to Illinois, is it?
It is not. No, Complete Streets is a sort of a nationally accepted standard, I would say, although it's implemented differently in different states all over the country. But the concept is that rather than just focusing on throughput of cars, how many cars can we get through and how fast can we get them through, let's think about all roadway users. Let's think about how a cyclist might be using that roadway. Let's think about how a pedestrian might be using that transportation system, and making sure that as those roads are either built or redesigned or reconstructed, that those other roadway users have the same input and the same value as just throughputing cars.
Interesting. So what were some of the design features that came out of the Complete Streets process?
Nothing unique. It's just that IDOT, excuse me, the Illinois Department of Transportation has to think about those other roadway users as they're doing their design. So pedestrian bump outs, pedestrian islands in the middle of an intersection, bike lanes, whatever kind of lane that might look like. Sidewalks, making sure that, and making sure that there's connectivity as much as you can so that people actually can use our transportation system as a system, whether they're in a car, on a bike, or walking.
Okay, so let's talk about what the bill that you co-sponsored, that I believe at the time was the Clean Energy Jobs Act.
It was.
And that was the precursor to what people call FEJA, which is the Future Energy Jobs Act, which is now in law and in its implementation.
Mm-hmm.
But the original act was signed by the governor in 2016. What are the key features and goals of that bill, or at least of the bill that you co-sponsored?
The bill does a number of things, but I would say the primary environmental features are to increase energy efficiency and to set targets for how much energy efficiency the state is going to achieve. The same thing with renewable energy, with wind and solar. That it's basically we don't have hydro here in the state of Illinois. It's very flat here. That we have targets for construction of renewable energy to meet under and how we're going to pay for that. Under the Future Energy Jobs Act. There's also was a big piece of it that is controversial within the environmental community, but also was controversial more generally, was that acknowledging that we have a very large nuclear fleet for generating electricity here in the state of Illinois. It is carbon-free. It's not necessarily clean, but it is carbon-free. And we had plants that were likely closing unless we did something to help them. And
closing because of cost effectiveness.
Closing because of cost effectiveness, correct, yeah. So there was a push from certainly the communities where those plants are located by Exelon and by labor to make sure that those plants stayed open.
So that those were sort of those were part of the act.
They are. Yes,
yeah.
We have these ZECs, zero emission contracts. I think maybe I forget what the C stands for, but
okay.
But yes.
Okay. And do you know what sort of the number of jobs that nuclear, and I think Illinois is the largest nuclear state.
I don't think we're the largest. I think Texas has more
Is that
nuclear
right?
plants than we do, but we have a lot. I think we have 9, and I don't know how many there are employed at each particular plant, but I think for a state our size, we have a lot of nuclear plants, and we are definitely a net exporter of electricity in large measure due to the number of nuclear plants that we have.
So I understand that there is new clean energy legislation afoot now, um, both to correct for some of the technical challenges in implementing FIJA. There are several bills out now, sort of under the clean energy rubric. One feature of one of the bills is to create a network of training centers for people working or potentially going to work in clean energy sectors, specifically to create pipeline of workers from low income communities and communities of color. Um, and as I understand it, the target for this bill or these couple bills is 100% clean energy by 2050. Is that
That is correct. So the new Clean Energy Jobs Act,
CEJA?
CEJA.
Yes.
We had CEJA, then we had FIJA. Now we're back with CEJA. Does have a target of 100% renewable energy by 2050. We also have a target of eliminating carbon from the power sector by 2030, which is a pretty aggressive target, but very excited about that. And also removing about the equivalent of 1 million diesel and gasoline powered vehicles from the roadway. And we do all that with this overlay of equity and jobs, and making sure that no part of Illinois is left behind in the clean energy economy.
So a couple questions. What is the political appetite, viability? I mean, we're at a time where there's a new Democratic governor and there are Democratic supermajorities in each of the houses. So perhaps the appetite is as high as it will ever be. But what do you foresee in passing this legislation?
So as you mentioned, there are, in addition to the Clean Energy Jobs Act, there are a number of other pieces of energy legislation out there. So some of the renewable energy developers have their own bill that they have filed, and then Exelon has a version that they filed, and Commonwealth Edison and Ameren, our 2 energy distributors in this state, also have bills that they filed. So and there's others as well, but those are kind of I should say that Vistra, formerly Dynegy, who is I think the largest coal-fired power plant owner in Illinois, has also filed a bill, has NRG, which is probably the second largest coal-fired power plant owner in Illinois. So that's a broad range of stakeholders who have all filed legislation. I think we are certainly we'll see something, I would say, in hopefully the next 6 months that will be the result of some discussions about how to meld the best portions of all those bills together, and to get as much of a clean energy economy booming in Illinois and to keep it booming going forward.
What are the main sticking points?
There's so many sticking points. Well, it's always a struggle to close down plants, whether it's a Maytag plant building dishwashers or whether it's a coal-fired power plant. It's just always hard to close plants down. The economics are certainly driving in that way. So even Vistra and NRG, I think, see that. And the legislation that Vistra has filed anticipates repurposing much of their facilities towards solar. Now, we think they do it too slowly and not in the most cost-effective way, but so that's one sticking point. And certainly our bill, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, would also force plants to close. So how we do that in a way that protects the property tax base for those communities, protects the workers in those communities, gets them retrained, those kinds of discussions will have to be had.
So you said that Vistra envisions eventually replacing its facilities with solar. Do you mean that like their physical property or just really?
Yes, yeah, actually taking their power plants and building brownfield solar on their power plant
That's really
property.
interesting.
It's very interesting. It is. Now again, we don't agree with the timeline for them shutting down their the portions of their plants or the amount of money that we would be spending on that. But in concept, it seems like the right direction.
Talk to me a little bit about the vehicle piece of this. You said taking a million. I believe you said taking 1 million diesel.
The equivalent of 1 million, yes, yeah.
And so how do you do that?
We do that through additional investment in transit, additional investment in cycling and walking facilities, and then also through electrification and making electrification more accessible, and using trying to make sure that as we do electrify the transportation sector, that we are getting people to use electricity when it's cheapest at night and charging at night, and not putting additional burden on the grid, on the electric grid.
What is the current state of electric vehicle uptake in Illinois?
I don't know, but I think it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty small. I don't know whether it's different in other states, but it's still pretty small here.
So, is the investment that CEJA foresees in the form of charging infrastructure or consumer rebates for actually purchasing electric vehicles?
It's more in terms of the charging stations, and then also, I don't think we have direct rebates in there. We may. Sorry, it's a 350-page bill, but we also want to say, for in places where car ownership is neither desirable or affordable, how do we promote car sharing? How do we do that with electric vehicles? How do we provide that last mile of transportation between someone's home and the train station, and then on the other end from the train station to their point of work? How do we make sure that is all seamless for them in a way that is carbon free?
So backing up a second and just focusing on these job training centers, what sorts of skills will these centers focus on?
We're doing some of that already under the Future Energy Jobs Act. We've got some job training programs that were anticipated in FEJA and that are actually occurring, and there have been graduating classes all over the state. It's been pretty exciting to see. It trains people how to install solar panels, both on residential, commercial, and then utility scale as well, and the skills that are necessary to participate in building renewable wind energy, I think, and then energy efficiency as well. That's the whole
where most
range
of the jobs
things.
are.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
I think that I'm looking at here a fact sheet on the clean energy jobs, and I believe that almost 73% are in energy efficiency. So most of those are going to be in electrical, plumbing, and construction trades.
And weatherization. And yes, exactly.
Weatherization as well, right?
As well.
Roofing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Exactly.
And these existing centers, where are they?
So we don't have centers currently, but we do have
Partnering with community colleges.
And organizations that host with community organizations in addition to the community colleges to host a training class that after, I don't even know how long training classes are, but after a series of weeks, graduates individuals who are prepared to take on these clean energy economy jobs.
That's really exciting. And,
it is.
And some of the research that we're doing at Jobs with Impact is showing that there's real bottlenecks in the supply side of the jobs equation, that there's actually a lot of demand, and particularly in energy efficiency, firms are having trouble filling these jobs.
Yeah, that's what we hear as well. And the other thing that's happened in the energy efficiency space that we've identified is that an energy efficiency contractor goes in and then there's mold in the house or there's some HVAC problem that has nothing to do with the efficiency, but they have to shut down the project because of these other issues. And so one of the other things we do in the Clean Energy Jobs Act is set up a health and safety fund, which will be kind of a revolving fund to provide grants, and they might be grants or loans, to homeowners and to building owners to try to address those other issues so that we can do the energy efficiency there and they can enjoy those savings.
So, I mean, I can hear perhaps some of the resistance to CEJA asking about, who's going to pay for this in a state that's broke. So who's going to pay for it?
So we think that there is a huge opportunity right now with to look at how we're making capacity market payments and to.
Can you break that down a little bit? Because that's a tough
so right
concept.
now, if a customer looks at their bill, there are a number of charges on your electric bill. There's the charge to take it from the power line or from to your home, and then there's the charge for the actual electrons that appear, and there are a number of other charges. And one of the charges is it's called capacity market, but it is a charge that is imposed in order to make sure that on the 5 hottest days of the year that there's enough electricity supply to meet that very, very peak demand. And literally it is like 5 days a year when we have really, really high peak demand. And we all pay to make sure that there's enough electricity in the system to meet that demand. We pay for that all year round. We don't just pay for it on the 5 hottest days. And so that if we can.
And those 5 hottest days are the most expensive.
Far and away the most expensive, right? And so if we can do 2 things. One is to bring down, through energy efficiency, to bring down that peak demand so that we don't have to have as much electricity flowing, and also reconfigure the way that we pay for that capacity. We think that there's a lot of savings to be achieved there that can help pay for all the other things that are all the other good things that are in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, including more renewables, more energy efficiency, and then the kinds of jobs-related programs that are out there.
So in looking at the 100% renewable goal in CEJA, how viable do you think it actually is based on where we are now? My understanding is that Illinois currently has about 4 or 5%.
I think it's up to 7 or 8. Yes. Yeah. One thing we do know is that it's not viable without the investments. And so between the Future Energy Jobs Act and the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we think that with the investments that are contemplated in those bills, that we can get there. And I feel like it's imperative that we do, with the problems we're facing with climate change. So I don't think that there's a lot of choice. I think that we have to get there.
And we have to have high ambition, which this sets the bar pretty high. Although
there are plenty of other states that are looking at 100% renewable by 2045, by 2040. So we are not the most aggressive out there by any stretch of the imagination.
So to what extent is Illinois playing alone in terms of its implementation on this path, both legislatively and in terms of the actual market? Or to what extent is it doing this in concert with other Midwestern states?
The Future Energy Jobs Act is really Illinois alone, but there are other states that are taking similar kind of actions. Washington State, I think just within the last couple of days, the legislature adopted something that they're anticipating that Governor Inslee would sign to move to 100% renewable by 2045.
Fantastic. And they've been working on for years.
Yes.
And they're finally there.
Yes, exactly. Other governors have committed to 100% renewable energy by some date in the future. I think the latest date I've heard is 2050. I mean, I think there's some earlier dates. So policymakers are working in that direction, but the market's also pushing in that direction. And that is really, I think, a big difference between what's happening today versus what was happening when we first started contemplating the Future Energy Jobs Act, is that the market is sending clear signals that coal is on its way out, and that nuclear, while it's carbon free, is still probably a little expensive for where the market is. And you can complain that policymakers are driving this, but I really, in a lot of ways, I think it's the market that's driving a lot of these decisions.
Yeah. So what's your outlook on, sort of state action, private sector action, and federal action? Obviously, we're living in a time where there is no federal action, or where it's moving backwards. Actually.
Right.
But, as you described this action in Illinois and in other states, states are moving along pretty aggressively. What is the right mix between kind of market and private sector, local and state level policy and federal policy, if we could have it?
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that question. I would love it if the federal government were taking climate change seriously and moving apace in that direction, but that's just not what it looks like. I will say that I feel like despite the administration's efforts to prop up coal, the market is just not letting that happen. And so that, coal plants are continuing to close at record pace. And they're just reaching the end of their useful life, and investments would be huge. And so that's all happening across the country. I do feel like it is really left to states to move forward on these policies. Municipalities are doing it as well. I mean, Chicago just is making some commitments to 100% clean energy, and other cities are doing that as well, both large and small. So I do think that is there a right balance between the state and local and federal? I don't know, but I feel like we all need to be pulling on the same oar, because the problem is really big.
Yeah.
And we all need to be pushing as hard and as fast as we can.
So just kind of looking back at your career so far, and I want to talk about the work that you're doing now in a minute, but this path that you took really from law to state government and being a legislature for 15 years and working on energy and climate, and as well as other issues. As people come to you, as I'm sure they do, to get career advice, interest is high. Young people really care about climate and the environment. They're pissed off, frankly, that we haven't done more. I'm looking at the protests in Europe and in some U.S. cities as well, as examples that are taking place right now. What advice do you have for people that want to save the planet?
There's a lot of opportunity to get involved, and it's wonderful to see people step up and run for office, because that's the person pushing the button. Yes, no, or maybe can have maybe not the most impact, but some really maybe the most direct impact on the policies that we adopt. And it really is about the policies that we enact as to whether or not we're going to be addressing climate change or not. So there's that opportunity, and I always encourage people not to look to the guy next to them, but to look inside you and see whether that's something that's available to you and that you're willing to do.
So focusing just on the policy sphere for a second. We were having a discussion earlier today about sort of policy degrees versus law degrees and ways into policy work in general. Yeah, I mean, what sort of educational background do you need or is beneficial? What sort of skills do you need, and how can you kind of work your way in? What are some of the pathways into having influence at the policy level?
I'm fascinated to see how many different paths in there are. And most people come to this work because of their passion and not because of any particular background that they have or educational degree or work history. It really is, it's just passion. And that to me is the most significant ingredient that you have to have in order to do policy work. You have to really believe in it's better, actually, I should say, if you really believe in in what you're pushing, because people, I don't, to have a degree in public administration or public policy or law or whatever is all fine. And some of those skill sets that you learn in the educational environment are helpful, but I wouldn't say to anybody, oh, well, sorry, you don't have the right background for that. I would just, it's just a matter of getting involved and having your voice heard and showing up. It's amazing what can happen when you show up at the state capitol.
Beyond the policy sphere, where do you see kind of the big opportunities, either from a energy transition or technology standpoint?
Well, certainly there's a lot of jobs in the clean energy sector. As we chatted about earlier, one of the hurdles in Illinois that we have to overcome is matching those jobs with the location where the development is occurring. Because right now, a lot of the solar and wind is happening in greenfields, in rural environments, and we're doing a lot of training in urban environments, and it's a long way. It can be several hundred miles in the state of Illinois to get to a solar development. So we're having to figure out how do we set policies that encourage those developments to occur not only in rural places in green fields, but also maybe in brownfields or in more urban environments. How do we make sure we're encouraging more distributed solar on homes, on businesses in more urban areas? And then how do we make sure that those developments that are in the rural areas have the workers they need? Those are some real challenges that we're facing.
So you decided not to run again after 15 years in the Illinois House, and actually serving as assistant majority leader, and as I mentioned, chairing a couple committees. And you're now consulting primarily in transportation and clean energy and climate change. So you kept saying we, so I assume that you are heavily working on CEJA.
I am.
Now.
I am.
So tell me a little bit about your work now.
Sure. So I'm a lobbyist, basically. I mean, that's the bulk of what I do. And the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition is one of the organizations that I work with, and they are a large coalition, but they are the main driver behind the Clean Energy Jobs Act. I also work with the Active Transportation Alliance, which is the Chicagoland region's bike, pedestrian, and transit rider advocacy organization. So I get to work on those issues as well, directly with them. And Elevate Energy, that does a lot of energy efficiency work, is a not-for-profit doing energy efficiency work all over the state. So I have a lot of opportunities in my new career to get involved in these issues. So when I say we, it really is we.
Yeah. Well, I also get a sense that the community of folks working on these issues in Illinois and Chicago is fairly small. You all seem to know each other, and in California, it's quite a bit bigger. But but after a few years, it actually seems
you learn
who's small.
Yes. No, it's very similar here, and I, as you mentioned, I've been doing a lot of this work on the environmental front for 25 years, and so. These are all my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it a good work environment where you're able to work on issues you really care about and work with people that you like.
It is I feel like it's a luxury at this stage of my career to be able to pick and choose the issues that I work on. And I feel very fortunate to be in that position.
So just as we wrap up, I want to kind of come back to the seriousness of the issue, right? We have, I think, a tendency in the climate and energy sphere to be a little bit self-congratulatory about the work that we do. And this is something that some of the young people that are, really concerned at a different level, like they're raising the alarm, and they've sort of said, hey, what you guys have done hasn't really worked. And as we look at the scientific consensus, we're really getting close to the point where we can't reverse the pretty serious effects of climate change. We're really sort of within spitting distance of that point where it could become catastrophic. What is the most important thing in your mind that we can do collectively to kind of win this fight and to get to that place where global emissions not only peak but start to go down pretty quickly?
Collectively, I think that we need to be serious about the policies that we enact and to push our policymakers to be aggressive, to recognize the threat, and to take big action, which is not easy for legislatures to do. Legislatures are places of incremental change. They are not places of bold change. But in this case, I think we have to be more bold than legislatures like to be. But I also think that individually, we can't abdicate that our individual responsibility to policymaker or to policies. Like, we all have to take account of the fact that are there alternatives to driving? Can I walk more to run my errands? Can I ride my bike more to run errands? Can I make sure that I'm turning my lights off, or I'm running my appliances in the middle of the night when there's abundant electricity? There's a whole host
Can I fly less? That's a big one.
Well, fly less too. Yes, exactly. There's a whole host of individual decisions that we make that we are so kind of on autopilot with them that I think, and we need to be rethinking how we each conduct our individual lives and the kind of impact we're individually having on the climate.
So based on your view of the rate of change with these issues in terms of policy change, in terms of market adoption of some of these technologies, do you believe that we can do it?
I'm not a scientist. I have no idea. But I think we have to behave as though we can. We have to have optimism that we can, because there really isn't another choice.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much.
Thank you
For being here today, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanky. Theme music also by Ian Swanky. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please tell your friends and give us a rating and review on iTunes. See you next episode.